Welcome. Good evening to the Act 46 Formal Study Committee meeting. We're very happy to be here again tonight, aren't we, everybody? I hear giggling in the audience. We are happy to be here because we have such an incredibly competent consultant that's leading us through this difficult stuff, and he is Dan French, who's on my right-hand side over here. Also at the table tonight is Cindy Brownell. She's going to be the Pownell Act 46 representative. There's some question about whether or not she's duly elected at this point. We're going to give her the benefit of the doubt and have her sit with us here tonight as part of the discussion, but she will not be voting until we're sure that the Pownell School Board has elected her. So, I guess the first order of business tonight is to look at the minutes from the July 13th meeting. I've had a chance to look them over. They were, as always, exceptional, Richard. Thank you very much. And very thorough. Did anybody have any corrections, omissions, questions?
Move to approve. Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes as written, please say aye. Aye. Okay, the minutes are approved. So we'll be moving on to what I think we've been building up to for a long time here, Dan, which is the sort of financial analysis, how the rubber hits the road. Okay. And for people around the committee, just to make sure, there was a late-breaking email that came out with some revisions. So if you didn't get that, Dan will explain what that means.
Yeah, and that's what's on the screen up here. So if you have an earlier one, it's inaccurate. Good evening. So purpose here, once again, this part of the process here is to bring you to a decision-making point. The committee's authority is essentially around this question: is it advisable, yes or no, to merge these districts, and if yes, under what terms? So the financial analysis is really about helping you make that decision. It isn't this kind of deliberation here, in my view. It's not like you vote on this. It just is what it is, So it helps inform your decision making. As I mentioned last time, my experience looking at this type of merger, where we're really not doing any major structural changes. We're not, closing schools or anything like that. Basically, what goes on in this financial model is that you're pooling all the spending in one place, and you're pooling all the students in one place. And that creates a tax rate that essentially, think of it as the average tax rate among the districts. So that means there's going to be winners and losers, so to speak, when you do that. So there's people that are above the average are going to see a tax decrease, and people that are below the average are going to see a tax increase. And as you know, Act 46 and what's propelled you forward on this sort of aggressive process does include some incentives that have been extended through November 30th. So part of the idea of the incentives, I think, is to soften the blow for that transition to the average tax rate for folks that are below the rate. So this first part, what's labeled Part 1 on the top of the screen, that was not changed from last time. So basically, and I'll just go through particularly for those committee members that are not school board members, the basic math. I included that sort of column on the left to show you how the tax rate's determined. I know school board members are more familiar with this. So, and I should say I would thank Jim and thank the staff, particularly for Renee, for putting this together in such short notice. The raw data, the analysis is all mine. So the first line, ed spending, is what it says, ed spending, which is essentially your budget minus local revenues. Not to do too technical on that, but you just consider it how much you spend for education. So that's all the ed spending among the districts that are considering merging. That's sort of the total. Likewise, the next number, equalized pupils, number of kids, aggregated all together. And then you divide those two together to determine ed spending per equalized pupil with $14,469. And then that number gets compared to a value determined by the legislature. And that's just the number. We can get into the details on that if you want, but basically consider it like an index. So for every dollar, for every percent you spend above that amount, your tax rate goes up accordingly. So in this case, your tax rate, if we divide, 10,160 into 14,469, we come up with an estimated residential property tax rate of $1.4241. So that's the result of, just pooling all the spending, pooling all the pupils among these districts, So this is like that average tax rate. That's the merged district tax rate, okay? Any questions on that?
And this includes North Bennington all the way through?
This is
right?
everybody, right?
Okay.
So, yeah, North Bennington, we'll talk about the structure of the merger, but from the modeling standpoint, it includes everyone because they're part of Mount Anthony, and even if they're likely to vote no on such a merger, the modeling should include them at this stage. We can run other permutations of this, but for the modeling standpoint, it's included. I should say their spending is included and their equalized pupils are included. So to do any modifications, we have to back both of those numbers out. It's not just backing out, like looking at their tax rate. We have to back out both numbers. So it's easy enough to do.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
How do you calculate equalized pupils?
Yeah, it's a sort of a complicated formula, but it's first thing you should know, it's like verified through an elaborate process by the state, and that number is like frozen on December 15th of each year. But basically what we do is we count up the kids every year, and it's so we do a census in the school, not to get too technical on it, but it's the first 30 days of school after the first 10 days of school. So the first 10 days of school are sort of a movement period where things are moving around. So after those first 10 days of school, we start a formal census period across the state, and we count for those first 30 days after the first 10 days, we count the number of students in the school and their attendance rate. And that determines something called average daily membership. And then we take an average between 2 years of average daily membership, so we get a 2-year average, and then that average is weighted or equalized. So the idea is that it costs more to educate certain types of pupils, more some than others. So for instance, students in poverty are given more weight. Students of English second language are given more weight. And so every district has a different demographic across the state. So it's a way to ensure if you had more poverty students, that more money would come to your district. So that equalization process happens at the state level, and then we go through a verification process, and finally on December 15th the number is frozen, and that goes into the calculation for the tax rate.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So the next table, what I'm doing in this next table is just displaying your current tax rates, and this is the place I made an error. Believe it or not, it wasn't on the projection, it was just describing the current situation. I multiplied a wrong column in my Excel spreadsheet. Apologize for that, but I was reviewing it this afternoon and something didn't make sense to me, and I was like, oh, there it is. At any rate, here's what happens. You can see you have each district, including Mount Anthony. So every district in Vermont has its own ed spending and its own equalized pupils, and that allows us to determine every district's tax rate under Act 68, okay? And as you know, all these districts are actually part of 2 districts currently. So you have a town school district and union school district. So each district, including the union district, has its own tax rate. What we need to do is figure out, and let's take Bennington as an example, what percentage of your students attend the town school district and what percentage of your students attend Mount Anthony School District. And then we figure out those percentages, and you can see in the first row, 43.98% of your students in Bennington attend the town school district. 56.02 attend the union school district, Mount Anthony. So we take those percentages and multiply them against the tax rates for the 2 school districts, and that's what the prorated tax rate columns are. So if we multiply, in the case of look at the town, if we multiply 43.98% multiplied against the local tax rate of $1.36, we come up with 60 cents. We do the same with Mount Anthony. Multiply the Mount Anthony union equalized pupil percentage, 56.02, against the Mount Anthony tax rate. That yields a tax rate of 80 cents. Then we just add the 2 together, and that gives us your total tax rate. Okay? So your taxpayers in the community are probably used to seeing that on the, I'll show it at the end, but on your tax bill it will show you, which district is determining your tax rate. So once again, I'll go through it again.
Excuse me just a second, Dan.
Yep.
Can people see the screen all right?
No.
Would it be helpful if the lights were off?
No, I still won't be able to see.
Still not going to see it? All right.
Let me
We
blow
make
it
some
up.
copies.
I can possibly, let me,
How about if we blow
zoom
up,
it in.
just
Yeah.
zoom in that bottom
You
part,
bet.
Dan,
You
maybe.
bet. Let me see if I can, oh, whoa.
That's good, that's
That's
good.
better.
Yeah, a little better.
A little better? Too big?
Definitely not too good.
Not too big? Let me try this, hang on. Would help if I, a little better, and I'll just do this. Hopefully we get it, almost.
Yeah.
Okay,
How's
is
that?
that better? A little bit?
Still a
No?
little eye strain going on, but.
I can see that if my life.
Yeah, so, you know.
Don't worry about it, I'm
Just,
good.
yeah, just
I
conceptually.
have it here.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same math, but just think about, and this, not, I don't give you the history on it because that would be distracting, but the idea is that every school district, including union school districts, have their own tax rates under Act 68. So you have, Mount Anthony has its own equalized pupils. Those are all the students from all the towns that belong to the Mount Anthony Union School District, regardless of what town they come from. And then you have equalized pupils that belong to your town school districts. So in the case of Bennington, those would be all students in grades K through 5 that live in Bennington. They belong to those equalized pupils belong to the Bennington Town School District. So if we look at your total equalized pupils, Bennington has a total number of equalized pupils of 894.7 total. We have to figure out what percentage of your equalized pupils are in grades K through 5 and belong to the town school district, and what percentage of your equalized pupils belong to Mount Anthony. And we figure out those percentages. And then how the math works in what's called Act 130 in Vermont, we multiply those percentages against the tax rates of the two different districts. So if we multiply 43.98% against the local town school district tax rate, we come up with a prorated local tax rate of 60 cents. We do the same thing with the Union District, come up with a prorated tax rate of 80 cents, and then we add the two together to get your aggregate tax rate. So the total education residential property tax rate for Bennington is $1.3975, the far right-hand column, okay? Mount Anthony doesn't have a total aggregate rate because it doesn't have a town and school district, and so forth and so on down the right-hand column. So I apologize, what I had screwed up, just multiplied I chose the wrong column when I did in my earlier version. But this is an important difference because when I'm going to bring these values down in the far right-hand column down to the next table. So,
And before you do, may I ask you that North Bennington question?
yeah, what about it?
Okay, so
Oh, yeah.
Jim, this relates to you a little bit, or to the SU a little bit, but so in conversation with some North Bennington folks, there was some question about whether or not there were 4 students that were maybe counted in the wrong district, may or may not have been counted in the wrong district, and would 4 students throw your math off if
No,
there were 4 equalized pupils one way or the other?
No,
or?
it's not material. I mean, you can see up here, there's 3,000 some odd students, you know, and actually, when you say 4, since it's a weighted 2-year average, you're really talking in this year a variation of 2 students, you know, because if there was an error this year, it's actually the number we use for equalized pupils is a 2-year average, a weighted average, so it's probably 2 or less, you know, in terms of a variable. It wouldn't be a material impact on the tax rate calculation at all.
Was the mistake made 2 years in a row, Jim? Would it have been?
It's 2 years, but it's not the same number of students each year.
Okay.
It's like 1 year, 1 student, 2.
Yeah. I mean, for the purposes of our modeling, it doesn't really matter, because what we're trying to determine here in terms of the committee's deliberations, I think, is just to give you a sense of what is the effect of merging, you know? You know, and it's still, I think the logic is still the same. You're talking about if you throw all the money together and all the kids together, you come up with this mean tax rate, and then there's going to be, you know, how people fit around that is really determining the effect on the financial impact. It's not going to be precise. And what we're working on here, and my disclaimers are listed below, but the idea that we're building a model for this new school district based on fiscal year 18 numbers. The merger wouldn't take effect 2 years from now. So, you know, it's just a hypothetical idea.
Okay.
So let me continue with the discussion of what's labeled as Table 3. So the tax rate, the first column is the total tax rate, and that's a revised number. It's up on the wall here. We compare that to the merged tax rate, and you can see, you know, before we start talking about incentives, and there's no CLA involved or anything like that, just the raw, you know, how does the merger tax rate compare to the current tax rates? So you can see Bennington would see a 3-cent increase, North Bennington a 14-cent decrease, Pownell a 7-cent decrease, Shaftesbury a 2-cent increase, and Woodford a 14-cent increase. So that's the first step. The next step is to then factor in the 8-cent incentive. So assuming that the merger qualified for incentives, we drop that by 8 cents, so we get a tax rate of $1.3441. And then we look at the increase decrease again. So in this case, when the incentive is implied, Bennington sees a 5-cent decrease, North Bennington would see a 22-cent decrease, Pownell would see a 15-cent decrease, Shaftesbury a 6-cent decrease, and Woodford a 6-cent increase. There's a last step to this. There's a mechanism in Act 46 that says no district can see more than a 5% increase in any given year, so that's a protection. I factored that in here, and none of these districts would be protected by that. In Woodford's case, the increase here is less than a 5%, so you'd still see the 6-cent increase.
So this means from your previous sheet, where you,
Yeah.
so Bennington, for example, had a 14-cent decrease,
Yeah.
right? But now you're saying Bennington has a 3-cent increase.
Are you in the right columns? I don't have the other one in front of me, so make sure you're in the post-incentive column. Sounds about right.
Increase, decrease?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yep, yep. And this makes a lot more sense to me. I should have caught it in my first draft, because you have, if you go up and you look at the current tax rates relative to that, it just makes a lot more sense in terms of where people's ed spending was. I had Shaftesbury spending lower than it should have been, so it makes more sense to me. So, once again, just to go through the disclaimers on this part, and then I'll open it up for some questions. It's important to acknowledge this is just a model using fiscal year 18 data. So the actual data for this merger, would be based on fiscal year 20 information. So we don't know what's going to happen between now and then. We don't know what the state's going to do in terms of the property yield value. You don't know what your ed spending levels will be or what your equalized pupils will be. So this is just a projection. It's important to acknowledge that. This is really just to give you some sense of how the merger would affect the tax rates. When you merge the districts, it produces a single tax rate, but we still have this issue of common level of appraisal. So this tax rate, the $1.42, would still be adjusted locally by each community's CLA. It's important to acknowledge. So we're looking at pre-CLA tax rates. I don't do that here because that's still a variable. That's still a variable whether you merge or not. So the local, Pownell will have its own CLA and so forth. So regardless of whether you merge or not, the tax rate's going to be different from community to community. The final tax rate.
Then this column, the second increase, decrease column is just for 1 year, right?
That's 8 cents. On the first year incentives are 8 cents. In year 2 it'd be 6 cents, 4 cents, 3 cents, 2 cents.
And those are factored in to this
In that
already?
second, that increase, decrease, the second increase, decrease, it applies the 8 cents.
To just the first year.
Yes. This is just a 1 year
Right.
snapshot,
Okay.
yeah. And once again, you can't even call this the first year because it's using fiscal year 18 numbers, So the first year is actually using fiscal year 20 numbers, which we don't know. But the idea, once again, the incentives are, the way to look at it, once again, with this kind of merger is that you're going to create an average or mean tax rate, and everyone's going to sort of orbit around that. The incentives allow people to get there. The people that are below that, it sort of softens the pathway for them to get to that middle rate. The last sort of thing I just mentioned as a sort of disclaimer is that this model does not include any changes in education spending as a result of the merger. So we added up all the current spending and threw it in a pot. We expect there to be some adjustments and reductions to that spending as a result of the merger. I arbitrarily chose $100,000. We can firm that up a bit, but we know there's going to be savings relative to audits and so forth, and possibly a position, an administrative position. Total cost of that position, I didn't, get into that in detail, but I would estimate if it has benefits, it's probably going to cost at least 50 grand total. So I chose 100,000. So you can back to the sort of the comment about the 4 equalized pupils. 100,000 is not a material difference either. I mean, 4 equalized pupils is not material in terms of you understanding the effect of this merger. It certainly would be important for the taxpayers to acknowledge that there's going to be savings in spending on an annual basis as a result of the merger. But it's not material for the modeling part, I don't think. So, just in conclusion, based on these assumptions, disclaimers, and so forth, if we used FY18 data, the projected tax rate of the merger would be $1.42. Becomes sort of the average. Bennington's rate, factoring incentives, Bennington's rate would decrease by 5 cents, North Bennington's rate would decrease by 22 cents, Pownell's would decrease by 15, Shaftesbury's would decrease by 6, and Woodford's would increase by 6. And this includes incentives, includes the 5%. And once again, this is all an estimate based on FY18 modeling. So it just gives you a sense of the effect. So I apologize for the late error in that. I should have caught it, but why don't I stop there and open it up for questions from the committee.
So, committee, what do you think? What questions does anybody have?
Well, main question I think Tom was going to ask is, are we going to have to eat Bennington's liabilities?
Yeah, so why don't we, I'll get into liabilities and assets in a minute, but yeah, the general thing is you all get to share each other's liabilities.
In other words, we eat them.
Yeah, and there's, when we say eat it, you own it.
well,
The
we
new
eat it.
district will own all liabilities and all assets. The assets, like reserve fund balances and so forth, can be dealt with in the transition period. So if there are assets you wanted to hold on to somehow, for example, if you had a fund balance that was a playground fund, the board might say, well, let's spend that before the new district goes live, because we don't want the new district to have that money. You can't do that with liabilities. Liabilities are sort of where they are, so you get to share everyone's debt.
Yeah,
John,
but-
we're going to get to liabilities in just a minute.
But-
Let's just stick on this.
But one question I have to ask a question of that, to spend the money that we have to get voter approval, and, it may not happen for a year after the merger, so, how are we supposed to handle that?
Yeah, well, you have, what you're thinking about, what's in the model for your merger right now is that the go-live date would be July 1, 2019.
Yeah,
So you'd have a 2-year period to do that. And so that's, even if you just use your annual meetings in March for any voter authorization, that's ample time to do it. You certainly could call a special district meeting. Districts do that. If they had, if you had a very aggressive timeline for merging, you would call a special district meeting if you needed authorization to spend your money on your reserve fund.
okay.
So that will be a really important conversation, John, as we get into that, those assets and liabilities. But are there other questions from the committee on the tax rate? Does everybody feel settled? I know I had a lot of trouble getting my head wrapped around this because I don't spend a lot of time in school board finances, but maybe some of you got there more quickly than I did.
Well, I have a question. On the first paper, it was $1.37 for Pownell, and then you jumped it to, after you corrected it, it was $1.49.
Right. I didn't factor in the Mount Anthony tax rate correctly. So that
That's
was the
quite a-
difference.
That is quite a big
Yeah.
difference for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we should, I have them both open too, but we should probably just fully ignore the first one,
Yeah. that's-
despite the fact that I really did like that 14-cent decrease for Bennington. But
Yeah, the concept is still the same. You're going to have, with this, once again, with this kind of merger, you could expect people that are currently have tax rates higher than the average tax rate to see a reduction, and the people on the other end to see it come up. So that's what merging feels like, So there's going to be people that benefit from that and people that don't benefit from that, and that's just how it's going to be. So in terms of your thinking about merging, you think about, well, is this committee, your job is to determine advisability or not. The voters ultimately are the ones that are going to approve this or not. If you vote yes, it's advisable. So you have to figure out, politically, is that a barrier to going forward? You can make the argument that this is all of your education spending anyway. It's a statewide funding system, so you can look at it that way too, that what your neighbor spends is factored into your costs because it's also factored into the non-residential property tax rate, which isn't attached to your local budget, but you're still paying for other people's stuff anyway, But
Just
Yeah.
one of the things that strikes me is that those incentives would be really nice to have. If we don't do this and the state imposes it, we're not getting any incentives.
right, that's the other, and I think that's a realistic conclusion that in your case, it's likely since the structural nature of these districts, you have like districts other than North Bennington, it's likely that under the statewide plan in 2019 that you'd be forced to merge the districts, in which case you wouldn't get the incentive. So you'd be looking at that first column of increase, decrease. So you'd be looking at a Bennington having a 3-cent increase, North Bennington probably wouldn't be forced to merge because of their structure difference. So you can see there's a variation there. And Woodford would probably lose the small schools grant at some point. And that'll be protected as part of the merger, and I'll discuss that in the next part. So there's definitely a downside to not considering financially.
I'll admit my ignorance on this, which is that I thought the incentives went away year by year. So the first 8 went away, and then 4 went away, and then 3 went away, and then 2 went away, so that we were down to a point where the incentives really seemed very insignificant to me. But if you look at it like this, 8, 4, 3, 2, then it looks like 4 years of pretty strong incentive.
Yeah, I mean, it'll basically get you to that mean, you know, you'll end up in that landing place, and everyone will have, basically the tax rate will be kind of where, in that spot, after the sort of a transition period.
Shouldn't we be looking pretty soon here at these numbers without North Bennington? Because that -14 is a pretty big outlier, and it's going to shift everyone else's, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the way to look at in terms of outlier nature is to look at their $1.56. So if you look at that first column, you know, so, and I'm looking at table 3 up on the screen. So you have Bennington at $1.39, North Bennington at $1.56, Pownell $1.49, Shasberry $1.40, and Woodford $1.28. So you think about those numbers relative to the mean rate of $1.42. So we calculate a new mean without North Bennington included, and that we'd exclude their ed spending and we'd exclude their equalized pupils, and we'd come up with a new mean, you know. And yeah, that would be interesting to acknowledge, and I can do that here on the fly if you want, or you can do it yourself. But you know, it's politically, what's the impact of doing that? But yeah, that's probably, you can do lots of different variations of that, or this model.
That 2018 residential tax rate, that's what we came up with when we were doing.
That's your current tax rate as a result of it. Before CLA, including Mount Anthony's costs. It's not just Woodford's tax rate, it's Woodford plus your share of Mount Anthony's tax rate, pre-CLA.
I guess even my long-term memory is gone.
Yeah.
I didn't remember.
You don't often look at it with the CLA not included, you know, so that's I think your memory probably would remember with the CLA.
so I've got, without North Bennington, an average tax rate of 1.39. So Bennington would essentially be flat. Pownell would be -10,
+9.
and Woodford 17, up 11.
Yeah, you just can't take the tax rates and do an average. You have to consider the ed spending and the equalized pupils.
Okay.
So, you know, the tax rate's a function of ed spending divided by equalized pupils. So I have to figure out, you know, if for instance, if North Bennington's tax rate is a function of incredibly high ed spending and fairly high equalized pupils, you know, mathematically that would affect it differently if the ratio is, so I can back those out. And I can do that here pretty quickly, if you'd like.
Because to Amy's point, I think it's important that we do look at that, because
Yep.
Do you mind backing it out?
it's my
No, no.
understanding that because their tuition, they can't merge with us. Isn't that correct?
No, they could if they changed their operating structure.
Right.
It's highly unlikely they would.
Right.
They have to be included in the model because they're part of Mount Anthony. You know, and they have to vote on it. Even if they vote no, they still have to vote on it for a
Right,
merger to go
right.
forward.
Right.
But the modeling of it, to a certain extent, should include them. Certainly, when you go to explain it to voters, you're probably, if you know for certain, you know, if we go to that next step and you guys say it's advisable, here's what the voters are going to need to see. They're going to need to see their costs taken out, you know? And some of you might say, my community would never vote for this either, so we might want to back them out as well, you know? So there's several different iterations of this.
Are you saying that that would be something we'd do in the future if we decide to go to a vote?
I think so. I think it's, you know, this is really up to you from a political perspective, but I think you have sort of an idea of what the modeling would be. I mean, this is, once again, this is not using fiscal year 20 financials, so it just gives you a sense of what you're talking about. You know, the merge tax rate would be in a $1.42 range, and you can back the 156 out and kind of understand what the impact would be of removing North Bennington. You know, it kind of tells you ballparkish what would happen. So those are important indicators, and you basically, what I conclude after looking at different mergers is there's nothing here that's a significant barrier to merging from a financial perspective. No one's going from like 97 cents to $1.40 or dropping way down, and those kinds of mergers are much more challenging. This is within a reasonable range of variance from what I've seen from other mergers. You might politically think otherwise, but you know, from what I've looked at, it's pretty reasonable. When we move on to the next part?
Everyone settled with this for now? Okay, yeah, those please.
Just one question before you do.
Yeah.
We didn't exceed the 5% protection.
You came close, but you didn't, yeah.
Can you run over the math on that, just so I...
Yeah, so what it would be is, I think you fell short by 2 cents or so, but you would take, the way the 5% works, and it works in, we'd look at your fiscal year 18 tax rate of $1.2853, and we'd grow that by 5%. And we compare it to the merged tax rate of $1.42.
So if it doesn't exceed that 5%?
Yeah, then it's a reasonable increase.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. And that 5% is, it's not there every year, it's there until you sort of reach the mean tax rate. So if you get to $1.42 at some point, and then next year the district just spends to go wild, spends a lot of money and thinks they can protect everyone, it doesn't work that way, you know? So once you get to the mean, the 5% goes away. It wasn't meant to protect people from reasonable constraints of Fed spending.
Before we go on, Dan, Amy, and others, how important is it to you that we see these numbers without North Bankton
I think
before we
it's-
go very much further?
I think it's really important.
Me too.
And I also think we should play it out and see it without all the communities. I think it's important when we go to the public that we say, these are the different scenarios, this is what it can look like. And maybe that's a later, like Dan's saying,
Yeah,
maybe that
that's up
happens
to you to
later.
figure out what it takes to, you know, because we have to definitely play those things out.
But I think the
modeling.
North Bennington part's kind of, I don't know. I think it's important.
Because that's the most likely.
I mean, I feel like operating here under the assumption that
They're not going to change their operating structure.
maybe.
But we don't know that they're not going to, but wouldn't they have to vote to change it before?
I haven't contemplated that, really. I don't see it as a, you know, from what I've worked with the
Right.
community a little bit over the years, I don't see that as an eventuality. But, I
Right.
mean, I could think about it for a minute, but it's not likely.
Right, so I think since we kind of feel that way, that it's not likely that they'll change their operating structure, and because they won't change their operating structure,
Right.
they can't be a part of the merger, I think it's important that we have that picture at least. And then maybe we can do the other scenarios
Yeah.
later. Like if, you know, we feel that Woodford's not going to vote for it because it's a significant increase in taxes, then we can do a,
Have that information.
right.
Yeah.
Is this just too much of a hypothetical? I mean, if the MUUSD fallback with North Bennington, how do we display, how do we depict that to people, that whether they're in or out?
So you have a couple documents that this committee would produce. One is the AOE merger worksheet, which is the other thing on your agenda tonight. In that document, there isn't really much space to do any financial modeling. That's information that goes to the State Board of Education to help them vote. You know, they have to approve a merger. So there would be some discussion in that document about the fallback process. You know, that you are proposing a red or proposing a conventional merger as defined by Act 49, meaning you're going to be eligible for the 8, 6, 4, and 2 cent incentives. And if you know, any of the districts, a majority of the districts in the union district voted down, the whole thing's done. And if this scenario happens, we intend to form a modified union. There would be some discussion. I put a couple sentences in my draft on that. We'd flesh that out a little bit. So the state board would know that in your recommendation coming from this committee, that you intend to proceed forward with a merger even if that happens. But then in your merger report, which is the other big document that goes to the state board, that report is really also for the community to hear from this committee about the pros and cons of different pieces of this, and that would include a lot of this modeling, I think, that we're talking about. So here's what would happen, here's the effect of that, and kind of almost organized on a frequently asked question kind of thing. You know, it basically includes all the information the voters would need to make an informed decision. Want me to go into the next part a little bit?
Let's try moving forward. May have to come back to
Yep,
this.
sure. So, next part is a summary of assets and liabilities. And this comes from audits information. So it's a good summary. We're still working, there's a few other things out there, namely the reserve fund balances we're still pulling together, but this gives you a good idea of certainly the value of properties and real estate, and then major bond issues and so forth, major debt. So you can see some detail on that. Once again, it comes from audit, and then there's a summary table that sort of puts it together. Basically, as I say in my analysis, shouldn't be surprising to you that the bulk of your assets are already shared among these communities in the form of the Mount Anthony Union School District. But the point again is that there'd be a go-live date for the district. The liabilities would become liabilities of the entire district. The assets would also become assets of the new district, provided, however, the local districts could divert some of those assets if legally it's appropriate prior to the go-live date. So typically the way these mergers are constructed is that all the assets and liabilities become property of the new district. You sell buildings back and forth for $1 or something like that, and then in the transition period, you have some time to divert assets, such as reserve funds if you wanted to. Other options districts do, if you had a reserve fund, for instance, that was dedicated to the Pownell School, you certainly could spend that money before the merger. You could also create a reserve fund in the new district that's dedicated specifically for the Pownell School. So that's possible as well.
Is that worked out through some sort of contractual MOU, or how does that work?
That gets set up by the voters through the merger process. If you know what you want to do ahead of time, the voters of the district establish reserve funds. So if you wanted to create a new reserve fund, you could do it coincidental with the merger process, since the voters would vote on that whole thing simultaneously, or you could do it at a subsequent meeting, but the voters of the district would create the new reserve fund. Okay, and then just the last part of this real quick on small schools grant. It's an important feature to consider in some mergers. You have, I would call it more of a protection with Act 46, that, the small schools grant is sort of up for redefinition right now. The state is considering new guidance to establish which schools are actually eligible for this. The only school in the district that receives that is Woodford. So basically, the conclusion is it would be questionable whether Woodford would continue to receive these funds if Woodford did not merge. I believe under Act 49 that the state board is now required by September of 2017 to identify those schools that are geographically isolated, which is one of the criteria for small schools grant. So we'll know in the fall a little bit whether Woodford's on that list. But assuming otherwise, it's questionable whether Woodford would be able to continue to receive those funds. If you merge, the amount of revenue is protected. It comes to the new district, however, not to Woodford. It comes to the new school district in the form of what's called a merger incentive and grant. So for this example, in fiscal year 18, Woodford expected to receive $38,250. Assuming the merger happened, then the new district would receive a merger incentive grant equal to that amount.
For 1 year.
For whatever, it would keep going. The way the law is written, it would say whatever amount you had, you keep until the legislature changes its mind. So you basically keep getting $38,250 until they decided not to continue to provide the merger incentive grants.
The new district gets
The new district would get it, yeah. So once again, this would be a typical kind of analysis we do around this issue of the committee's deliberations for advisability or not. It's obviously pretty hard to make a decision on this unless you understand the implications emerging from a financial perspective. So that's all this model is designed to do. So hopefully you find it useful to your deliberations.
John, did you have any other questions on assets and liabilities? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I don't have any other questions. I just want to know who's going to eat the liabilities for Bennington. And it's obvious we're all gonna do.
Yeah,
I think that's a big concern. I mean, most of us.
It's a great big
that
concern.
number is a big number for liabilities. Compared to 26,000, talking
Yeah,
4.6
so-
million.
And I agree, I don't think Pownell, so the small town of Pownell with 3,500 registered, well, 32 population with only 1,700 registered voters are even gonna accept this. That's a lot of money. We have no businesses. It's, and the incentives, as far as I'm concerned, it's like throwing a carrot in front of you.
yeah, I mean, you can look
don't-
at it sort of a bribe. I mean, it's just
Yeah, it is.
mathematically
It
to
is.
kind
It
of...
amounts to nothing compared to what
Yeah.
you're gonna be paying extra.
Mathematically, it's just, once again, I think it's, I don't use the term bribe, but it kind of works out a way to ease people's transition to that mean, for those that are below. But once again, I think it's a fair assessment at this point in the game with Act 46, because we've watched it evolve, whether the legislature was going to make significant changes to it. My interpretation of Act 49, which is pretty emphatic, it says, we're not going to make any major changes to this law. And we've extended some opportunities for you to continue to receive incentives, so I still would conclude that you're likely to be forced to merge and assume, the assets and liabilities of these districts. The only thing that's makes it more digestible perhaps is having the incentives to do that.
Dan?
I guess I would note that Pownell, even without incentives, sees a, under this model, 7-cent decrease in their tax rate.
Yeah, I mean, so it's one way to look at it.
Tax rate has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, it's payback for the bond.
If the district needs $500,000, regardless of the tax rate, you're gonna get the $500,000. Okay, the tax rate doesn't have anything to do with anything. Okay, it's what is gonna happen with the money and how much money you're gonna need. And in this case, Powell's gonna need more money to pay off Bennington's debts. Simple as that.
And if Shasberry throws a ventilation system in there as a bond.
That's right, but,
Pownell, we're going to stick more money in Pownell, siphon money from them. I mean, that's the big thing, is you have these
Right.
huge bonds.
And my one question is, how's this gonna help the kids? What's this do for education? Doesn't do a damn thing.
Well, that isn't what we came up with last time, so
Well, that's what
yeah.
the committee came up with, that's
Right.
not my opinion.
Sure.
My opinion is it doesn't do a damn thing for the kids.
Yeah. So if we'll take a look at this other document, that's the other document in here. So, once again, the committee's decision is really about, is it a good idea to merge these districts? So we worked through this pretty quickly, but this document is the sort of, the thing that goes to the AOE, and it's sort of a good summary of the different variables. The very last thing we worked out for the committee's work plan is this issue of necessary versus advisable, so through the merger process, it could, if there's, just in terms of process, if there's the majority of people on this committee that want to vote that it's advisable to merge, we need to figure out politically which communities are likely not to approve that when it goes to the voters. And one of the techniques to sort of flesh that out a bit is this issue of necessary versus advisable. So, for instance, I kind of, and I'm on this first page here, it's on the screen. I took the liberty of identifying North Bennington as an advisable district because we know they're probably likely to vote no. Likewise, Mount Anthony's included under the law. The voters of Mount Anthony School District don't vote on this thing, but the way the state sets this up, they're included as an advisable district. The reason they don't vote is that their structure derives from the town school district. So the voters in the town school district, since they created Mount Anthony, they have the authority to change its structure, which is essentially what happens through this merger. So the other districts, so for instance, if Pownell, speaking for Pownell, and Pownell felt very strongly there's no way the Pownell voters would vote for this, if this committee wanted to still move forward with advisability, the question would be whether Pownell would be listed as advisable or necessary. Because what happens is if the advisable districts vote no, then the others can still go forward. In the case of this situation with the Union School District, it would take still a majority of the elementary school districts to approve the merger in order for it to happen, to form that modified unified union school district. So I took the liberty of filling this out a bit just so you get a sense of what it looks like. You have I'll just kind of go through this a bit. You have, this is probably going to be a red and conventional merger. We check with the state on that, and that's kind of how that would be set up. We would need a date of when the vote would go before the voters, if you want to proceed. We need a name of the school district. These goals come from the items we discussed last time and approved by the committee, so the educational advantages emerging. The schools that are going to be operated, no schools are going to be constructed. Some configuration issues. I listed the basic debt of the districts. I have on item number 7, which is on page 7, we need to get the appraised values. Renee has sent that to me. I haven't included it since, but the appraised values of the buildings would go in there. And then some voting configuration about the directors. This is kind of incomplete a bit as well, and we would include language on school closure, as you mentioned. I also threw in Australian ballot language. We didn't discuss that, but just to give you a sense of how this is shaping up based on your work to date. So in terms of process, you're kind of at that point. There's really, I mean, we could definitely do back up North Bennington on the financials. It's a question under our sort of aggressive timeline is, does the committee want to move to a vote on advisability tonight or at some future time? Your last step before you kind of do that is to determine if that's where it's going to go, is to determine who would be necessary and who would be advisable based on a political evaluation of what this thing looks like.
Well,
I'd say the sooner you get to it, the better off you are. Do it now.
you say get to the vote.
If you're gonna do it, do it. You know, stop humming and hawing, get it done. Simple as that.
Can you talk, I know we've talked about this a lot, but can you talk about what happens if the vote is no, it's not advisable? What, the state, there's a certain amount of time, the state will deal with all these individual districts in a couple years or a year?
If the merger fails, so if you
Yeah,
propose a merger.
if the merger doesn't
pass.
Doesn't pass or isn't even voted,
Right.
deemed advisable.
Well, that's the same. We'll just say
yeah.
it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it doesn't
Okay,
happen.
So it doesn't happen. So, as I mentioned earlier, Act 49 speaks a little bit, gave us a little more information about this. So you have each school district, you can do it independently or in conjunction with other school districts, has to submit a plan to the state by, it's going to be December 26th of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to submit a plan about how you're going to endeavor to meet the policy of goals of Act 46, basically in your current configuration. That plan goes to the Secretary of Education, and she reviews all of those plans from across the state and has a responsibility under the law to create a statewide plan for the governance structure and give that to the state board. She proposes a plan to the State Board of Education. I think it's by July 1, 2018. And then the state board conducts a series of hearings and then ultimately adopts the plan or modifies that plan. The idea is that once the state board does that, then you're going to be forced to merge in accordance with that plan. And the state board is required now to create model articles of agreement that would govern those, and you have 90 days locally to either accept those articles or create your own. So basically, what we're seeing now from Act 49, the merger plan sort of says, here's what you're going to need to do. The state creates model articles of agreement for those basically forced mergers, and you have a 90-day window to come up with some other articles of agreement. If you don't, then you will use the state articles of agreement, and those districts will be forced to merge. That's Act 49 now. It's just passed.
Dan, go ahead.
So that's if we don't do anything. What happens if Pownell or Shasberry or one of doesn't vote for it? They're considered advisable, so the rest of the districts merge. Eventually, will the state come down and say, you got no other option, you got to merge with these folks?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Those districts that do merge don't have to do that self-study plan. Right. Those districts that don't merge are required to do that. What the state would do with those districts that didn't merge, I don't know, at that point.
Can you review again what it takes to have a successful merger in terms of number of it?
Yeah, so in this situation, we have elementary school districts that are all part of a union secondary school district. And, you know, the original authority to create Mount Anthony comes from these town school districts that are all listed here. So it would require a majority of the current districts that are members of Mount Anthony to approve any sort of modification of the structure of Mount Anthony.
So you need 3.
Yeah, so you have Bennington, North Bennington, Pownell, Shasberry, Woodford. You know, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's going to take 3 of you to do it.
And does that include is that the fallback with 2?
So if 3 of you vote yes to merge, then that group of districts would merge.
Okay.
And that is the fallback position. You know, so a subgroup
Oh,
merging.
okay.
So the proposal would be everyone, some listed as necessary advisable. If 3 of you voted yes, those 3 would be able to move forward with a modified unified school district. The other ones would remain, the modified version of that, as you know, is that they would still remain town school districts and still members of the Mount Anthony School District, which would, that's the modified part of it. And you'd still have a supervisory union as well.
So if 3 districts voted it up, Woodford became necessary and voted it down, we're not changing the dynamics going forward. We just might not be part of the merger.
Yeah, you kind of went through a couple things. If we just stick with the idea, if Woodford voted it down, if the merger happened and didn't include Woodford, is that what you're asking? What would Woodford's status be?
Well, I guess as a general thought, I don't see any alternative for Woodford.
Okay.
I think we're going to have to be part of this, but I'd be surprised if folks accepted an increase in the tax rate on top of what we've already increased, and they're inclined to reject that.
Right.
Increase in liabilities too.
Yeah, so you
Well,
so then you come back, so if we play that out, so that's why I wanted to break it out a little bit, so we get to the issue of necessary and advisable, right? So if we said it's unlikely Woodford voters would approve this, we maybe would consider them listing them as advisable to the merger. So the way this necessary advisable thing breaks out, if any of the necessary districts voted down, it's a fail. So you're basically declaring politically, the only way this is going to move forward if all the necessary voters agree. Okay? So it's sort of a political assessment. It still requires a majority. And you could have, I know on your prior model, you had every single district listed as advisable. And in that case, it would, if any 3 voted for it, you'd have this this other process would occur, the fallback position would happen. If all of them were necessary and any one of them voted it down, the merger would fail.
Dan, I thought, sorry to interrupt, but I thought we were told that we couldn't have all advisable.
Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, because it's sort of, if you can, as a committee, if you can even come up with a vote that says, it's advisable to merge these districts, someone politically should be on the commitment here to say it's necessary to do this. It doesn't make sense to me anyway. I mean, I told that to Jim, is to list everyone as advisable, sort of a lukewarm commitment to the process. In that case, this committee should just vote no, in my opinion. You know, it's like, why, you know, someone should be listed as necessary to the process, you know.
I mean, I guess the thing I could probably speak for Shasberry, Pownell, and Woodford is, you know, how's the liabilities going to impact us and our budget? I mean, how much do they cost per year? And that's a Bennington question. And, you know, you have this bond, you know, what's the payback and how would you divide it?
You don't. I mean, it's all represented in the new
Yeah,
tax
it's
rate.
represented, but, you know,
Yeah.
the community members, they want to know how's it going to increase the money.
Yeah, and it's basically, the answer is this is the new tax rate, and that includes all the debt and all the assets. So there's no separate fee to you, it's just this is your new tax rate. And it's either higher or lower, you know.
Dan, I think we need to take a full stop here and run this to ground, because it feels to me like you've demonstrated that the tax rates themselves are not going to be that big a change, except for Woodford, and so, and Woodford's is not even big enough to hit the 5% thing. So the tax rate is not the issue. It seems to be where people are getting stuck here is the blending of the liabilities. And
Yep.
I don't know, Jim, if you can help out with this, but it feels like we need to run this firmly to ground.
Right.
You know, what this means to communities.
One thing I would offer is that everyone be assuming parts of Bennington's liability, but this is a forever process, and there is going to come a time that Shasberry is going to need a bond, or Pownell's going to need a bond. Those buildings are aging in the same way, and they'll need work done on them that will require a bond that will be shared by Bennington. And over time, I believe it would all average out.
I think the concern is, I mean, Shasberry's done a lot of the work.
So hasn't
You know,
Pownell.
So has the Pownell. So,
12 years.
So I mean, you're just getting out from under these other bonds, and now you're jumping ahead and paying a bond that, and you want to say it's in, all kids benefit, which is fine if it's in the tax rate, but, how do you sell that to the voters,
Right.
district?
Yep.
And, if I'm looking at that saying, well, we owe 4.5 million, people are going to vote no just based on that. We have no debt, why should we pay Bennington's debt?
Right.
My concern is how do you sell that to the community? And I don't know if I have an explanation
Yeah, I
to
mean,
sell
that's,
it.
the only way you really do that is to talk, once again, I think
On
where
tax rate.
committees are, well, not so much, I would agree with Dick, it's not, the tax rate doesn't really do it for you. It's more a question of going back to the goals, and is it, you've had success, I think, what I've heard from you anyway in my brief time working with you, that your cooperation around Mount Anthony has been successful.
Yep.
You share in the debt of Mount Anthony, you share in the liabilities, and that's represents the pool resources of these communities. Can you extend that to elementary grades? That's the question.
That's the question.
Yeah, so if those goals can't get you over that hump, that's where you're gonna have political
And
trouble.
I think
So you
the
gotta-
communities, when you have the debt for MAU, it's the new schools in there, and they see that
Right.
as, okay, this is built in, it benefits
Yep.
Shasberry kids. But, to say a liability in Bennington, how does that benefit Shasberry
Sure.
kids? And that's to be the hard sell,
Yep.
is to say, how can it benefit
Yeah,
Shasberry
and
kids?
it's, like I said, the goals, what happens with these is you start to say they're not Shasberry kids. It's,
Yeah.
you're responsible for all these kids.
You're responsible for all the
Yeah,
kids.
and all these kids, yeah.
And if the state is true to its word, and this merger takes place after 2019 through being forced, you're going to assume that liability anyways without
Yeah.
any of the tax incentives.
No incentives.
Yeah.
No incentives.
It's hard, that's like, just for motivationally, I don't know your communities that well, but you certainly look at the incentives as bribes, and you can look at the mandate as a stick.
Yeah.
But the question is, can you find a way to move forward? I think, back to the argument that you have found somehow to be able to work together in grades 7 through 12. Why was that possible and this is impossible? Is there advantages to extending that down? What makes the elementary so sacred that you can't do what
Yeah.
you've already done successfully at the other level? At some point in time, there were assets and liabilities. You had high schools, and
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know
I
the
think the
history.
difference is that they're community schools.
Yeah,
So it's not,
And-
but you're
a part-
talking districts, not the
Yeah.
schools.
And I mean, I
Some
think-
schools.
Yeah, but and I'm I'm a Bennington resident, but I'm looking at from these
Yeah.
other communities is that Shasberry has its own school.
Right.
So they're all,
Yeah. so
I mean,
you
it's
get-
very
You get to more of that
tangible.
emotional issue.
Exactly.
That's what
I
makes
think
it
the
possible.
That's what you're up against.
And I think high schools are easier to acknowledge back when they did it under the law. You can see the benefits of a bigger gym and a bigger auditorium and the breadth of the programming. And your facilities were probably, the smaller high schools were probably not in good shape. So you have a modern institution and take pride in. So it's a
Even
little
when-
harder, I think. to
I
do.
think even when MAU formed, that was the big, there's not many
Yeah.
people that can speak to that were around then, but, that was probably a big impact of, how's it going to benefit these small communities. And
Sure.
I'm sure it wasn't an easy
Right.
vote to occur, but, we're feeling that situation now versus 30 years ago, 40
Right.
years ago,
Yeah.
before it was born.
And we've already, done that to some extent with BSD. I mean, you have 3 schools
Right.
that are within one district, and you've had to move past the thought process of these are,
My
it's Molly
neighborhood,
kids,
yeah.
it's the Monument
Yeah.
kids, it's the Ben L kids, it's the BSD kids.
Right.
So it's just taking that to the next level, because there are situations, even with BSD, like one school needs something more than the other school, and you're all sharing in that debt, because one school is bigger than the other. And you have a smaller school within that that district. So it's that same concept, you're just expanding it.
This wasn't an easy process 30 years ago to get to work
Right.
together either. It
No.
was- I forget how many votes.
Yeah, and there was more money. I mean, the state provided a lot of money for construction of new high schools, so that was pretty, that was a pretty obvious thing to do. This is a little more challenging, but it's, and this is a different time than 2 years ago when people were like, oh, here's an opportunity to move forward, we're already doing that, versus now the mergers are, you're under the gun, really. I mean, it's pretty clear, I think, now that you're probably going to be forced to merge one way or the other. I mean, Act 49 is pretty clear, I think, more clear than Act 46 in that regard. But is that enough to sort of force people to do something? I don't know.
Well, I would say Woodford ought to fall under the advisable column.
Shall we go through this just in the sort of playing it out feeling? See what it looks like?
Yep.
Let's start at the top then. Bennington?
I mean, I think you really have no choice but to make Bennington necessary, in my opinion.
I agree.
Okay.
And I wish Pownell would be necessary, but I know Pownell, and I don't think they're gonna,
Better put it as advisable. If
Much
it's doubtful,
better.
because if it's a necessary and they vote no, then
Right.
it's a done deal, so.
right. I mean, it's inevitable, and you're gonna have to do it, so.
Yeah. Might as well
But-
not jeopardize the vote.
The trouble is, you get the votes.
Shaftesbury?
I mean,
I think
We're gonna
Shaftesbury's
be
worse
the-
than Pownell.
I mean, I think we could be the 50-50. I mean, some people want to see it go through. I know some people want to stick us in advisable. I mean, I'd probably have to say, if you look at the tax rate, I gotta look at that number. If that's what you're saying we have to look at, I'd probably say, looks good for us from a tax rate. I'd probably say we should be necessary, but I head towards advisable in my head, honestly.
So that we don't scuttle the whole thing?
Yeah, it's an assessment of risk, would it be close or enough to jeopardize the whole
And-
thing?
That's $1 million question for Shaftesbury's.
Yeah.
It could be close, but
Yeah.
if the tax rate is what you're looking at the end of the day, it's a tough one.
I still don't think it's the rate that's gonna have an impact. It's whatever you're gonna owe,
Yeah.
period. And you can tax rate it at 2%, and you're gonna, get a $500,000.
Yeah.
Or you can, 10%, you're still gonna have to get a $500,000.
Still gonna get $500,000.
Makes no difference what the rate is,
Yeah.
it's what the end result is. So don't let the rates fool you.
Anybody want to address that?
Again, I've, worked with several different communities. I've seen people just drool over the idea of 2 cents, and I think my bias, as I said to you, is I think you come back to the goals. If you can't make this thing a rationale for why there's some advantages, then it's a house of cards in a lot of ways. So, go back to look at, I know we did this quickly, but it does represent work from, the other group, are there advantages to doing this? And I think you identified the logical ones, and there's certainly, you're creating, I think, a much more sustainable governance structure, out of it.
I guess.
But you need to explain that to the voters.
I guess my question, if I stick Shaftesbury as a necessary, if they vote no, what's the impact for Shaftesbury?
Well, the first thing is if any of the necessaries vote no, the whole merger has failed. Okay? So you could certainly then go to a revote. You'd have 30 days to do that. So in this case, if the incentives are in play, you have to have an affirmative vote prior to November 30th. So you back away from that. That means if you want to anticipate a petition or a revote, then you're probably going to have the initial vote by mid-October. So you have 40 to 30 days to warn a revote.
Yeah.
So, that would all have to occur prior to November 30th. So, but if any of the necessaries voted down, the whole thing goes down. But if you're an advisable, you vote it down, then you'd have a chance to still join back into it prior to November 30th. But after that, you're going to go through that self-study process. And then maybe be forced to merge somehow.
I mean, I think the big education to the public is that that this could be forced on them regardless. And I think that's what we really need to,
Then it
make
takes
sure
what you know you can use and.
we really get out there to the public, because, yeah, they could, vote it down and that's fine and they're making their decision. But in the end, they're not going to be making the decision. And I think it's a really important point that they understand that they could be giving up those incentives by voting it down.
Yeah, who wants to pay more taxes? All right, so maybe advisable then for Shaftesbury?
Yeah, I think advisable. just
Given
be
what he
safe.
just said, and Woodford, you've already spoken to this. What's that?
The other Shaftesbury rep.
Oh, I'm sorry, Aaron,
I just feel
I
like we're
forgot
in a
that you were
crapshoot either
Shaftesbury.
way, and I think it's pointless to like go through all this and just be forced into it anyway.
Yeah.
If we say we're necessary, then where does that land everybody else and us?
Well, you got a skin in
Right.
the game. You can say, you got a skin in the game for it. You brought it forward. And the likely eventuality anyway, if the thing gets voted down, is that you're going to be going into that self-study process anyway.
Then we have to do this whole thing again within our town? Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
this whole thing, you don't have
Only
to have
worse.
a committee. It's a complex report, but you don't have to have a committee do it. I mean, your administration can do it. Jim's going to be doing it for you, I'm sure, But you'll be working on that as a school board. You could certainly work in conjunction. It says you can submit one of those plans in conjunction with other districts or by yourself. But you have to go through that analysis. And, as I mentioned, if we did a report, we have some analysis, but if you did a report, then you could use that report as there's some good information in the report that you could use to do the self-study as well.
So
Okay.
so if we end up with everybody except Bennington, that's advisable. This still goes forward.
Yeah, if this committee then says, here are the terms, okay, we've got a list of who's necessary and advisable based on sort of a political risk assessment, and then you guys hold a vote and you say, is it advisable to merge these districts under these terms? Meaning, do you feel good enough that the voters, you guys don't get to decide this, the voters get to decide it. Do you want to give this to the voters in this format, And then if you voted yes, we would go forward and create a merger study report, which is sort of a narrative explaining the pros and cons. And that document goes to the state board, but it's a really critical document that goes to your voters as well, because it gives them sort of the background information necessary when they go to that polling place to be able to make an informed decision.
It doesn't. If Woodford voted it down, which I would expect they would do, it would be not a good thing to destroy a whole setup
For a relatively small number of
for
voters.
relatively few voters, and we still need it for protection, if nothing else.
Yeah.
So advisable then is where you're landing.
Yes.
Okay, John?
I have a question on the vote. Regardless of the outcome of the vote, can somebody have a revote? Can somebody petition for a revote?
Yep.
Whether it's pass or fail, I mean,
Yeah, you have 30 days, just like any other vote
okay.
of any other issue.
So in other words, your decision isn't made until
30 days.
till
just
30
like-
days
yeah,
after the decision's been
Absolutely.
made.
Which
Yeah.
is part of our calendar. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, so it feels like there's not a lot of wiggle room here to do this any other way but this. Which
Okay.
is, as Dick described,
With Bennington is the necessary, everyone
Bennington
else
is
is
necessary.
advisable.
And honestly, I mean, I can't imagine sort of a merger happening without Bennington, so.
Yeah.
So if-
Necessary and everyone else advisable.
Yeah.
So I suppose if we were going to do this as a committee, it would be nice to have some sort of motion on this at some point.
Yeah,
or-
I would suggest maybe a vote on the list of necessary and advisable, just to confirm that. I mean, you've kind of gone around. I would suggest, just like we voted incrementally on the other things, to have the committee vote, someone move that these districts be listed as necessary and these districts be advisable, so we can establish that as sort of a definitive item.
Okay,
All right.
I didn't hear a lot of wiggle room on this. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll move that Bennington be considered a necessary district, North Bennington, Shaftesbury, Pownell, and Woodford be considered advisable.
Second?
Okay, any
Wait,
discussion?
Do we need MAU in there as well?
And MAU by default is going to have to be listed as advisable, but it's not really an option to list it as necessary.
Other discussion, other opinions that
Are
didn't come
we,
in?
are we able to say, to identify North Bennington? at this table? They're not
Yeah, you
here.
can, any district could be listed as advisable. They don't have to be members of this
You
committee.
could even name another town that isn't even
Oh,
part of
all right.
us.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, another
we're
district.
not
that may-
overstepping our.
Jeff wants Arlington.
Yeah, you can.
Make a motion?
There's plenty of room on the form. You can go on to the next page.
Let's annex Williamstown. All right.
Right here, see this
We didn't
bird?
vote yet.
Let's see, so if there is no further discussion, then I would say all in favor of the proposal, say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstain? Okay, so if we go forward, this is what it looks like. Where does that bring us, Dan?
So it's the next, what you're ultimately shooting for is a formal vote on advisability, and you basically have roughed out now in the form for this worksheet that's on the screen. These are, the general terms by which, the districts would merge. I think it's enough information. Maybe you don't think it's enough. But if you think it is enough, at some point the committee should move to a formal vote. Is it advisable to merge these districts, yes or no? And then if you vote yes, then the next step would be to draft a merger study report, including articles of agreement. And that draft would be brought back to the committee for a formal vote as well. If you vote no, the thing shuts down. This committee is essentially disbanded. And you send a letter to the Secretary of Education saying, we did our work and we determined it was not advisable to merge these districts. And this committee is dissolved.
So you need a motion
Well,
to move
okay.
forward with for this committee to move forward to the merger.
At some point, whether that's tonight, that's really that is your authority. That's where your purpose to exist. So is it advisable or not? And when do you want to do that tonight? If you're,
Better to do it.
Yeah, I'd like, when you make the
Done.
motion, I'll second it.
Make a motion that we move forward. If we don't do it, we're gonna get it anyway, so.
I'll second
I
that
don't
motion and
believe
the
that.
advisability.
You gotta fight it, you can't.
Well,
Give
You're
it-
gonna get it one way or another. So.
I don't believe it.
Okay, you want Boston to tell you what to do, or you want to tell Boston what to do?
all right, so we have a motion and we have a second. And I'm hoping that there will be some discussion about this, but I know Dan and John want to hurry up and take the vote here, but
I don't care.
it does feel to me like this would be a really good time for people to weigh in, and I'm almost tempted to go around the room and see if we could get everybody just to give their thoughts on where we are right now.
Can I ask a clarification? Dan, what you said there, this is just a draft, so if they vote this thing, it's going to get revised and
Absolutely.
come back for
Yep.
a formal vote.
that's right. So this is.
We're not voting on this.
That's right.
Right.
This is just to give you enough information to kind of come to this decision-making point. Is it a good idea or not?
Do we want to spend more time
That's right.
coming up with
So
the articles?
the next step is to produce the document you're looking at here would be revised. You'd create a merger study report, both of which would come back for formal approval to this committee before it went to the AOE.
Or do we want to disband?
Or you want to disband.
Okay, so I hate to put people on the spot, and you're welcome to say pass if you like, but I would love to just hear everybody's thoughts on this. And why don't we start with somebody,
Start with Cindy.
start with who?
Cindy.
Cindy, you want to start?
Sure, what would you like to know?
I'd like to know your thoughts on where we are right now as we begin to consider a vote on whether or not to let this go to the voters or whether to disband.
I would say disband, because I know what the town of Pownell's gonna say. It's a huge burden on them. I was in the audience many, many times. This is not my first time on this board. And I thought the articles of agreement were going to deal with the financial part, that it was gonna be kept separate, even though the board was gonna merge it. Everybody's gonna merge. Now it sounds like everybody's gonna share the burden. That's a big burden. It's a huge burden to go back to the town of Pownell and say, who complain all the time about their taxes now, the burden is on the homeowners. We have no businesses. So we're gonna say to them, all right, now we're gonna share this $4 million. Oh, but wait, we're gonna give you an incentive. I'm not even gonna tell them that, or I'm not gonna be even the one that's gonna, because I don't believe in it. I truly don't. And then I'm looking at, Pownell gets 2 people on this new board with 4 members from Bennington. Bennington, I love you dearly, but when we try to vote for something with 4 Bennington members, Pownell's never, or Shasberry or Whitford, we're never gonna get what we ever need. So personally, I don't know why we don't stay the way we are. And I think if we write it up and show them how much we share now, we share a lot more than people in North Vermont. We really do. And at one point, we were gonna write that letter up. And I do realize that our superintendent doesn't like all the meetings. I think we can work that out. But personally, I don't believe in this one board.
Okay, thank you for that opinion. I'm going to ask that we not sort of do a debate thing here, but Dan, maybe you have special license if you want to react to things as we go, or if you want to hold your comments to the end, but
Yeah, no,
I'd like to just give everybody
yeah.
a chance to talk if
No, I
possible.
don't, I mean,
so.
I've heard these comments before.
Okay.
I've been in meetings with you as well, I remember. It's,
Right.
So it's just nothing you're saying I haven't heard from people before.
Okay.
They're all really, realistic assessments of the process.
Dan, what do you think?
Well, I'm a realist, so I know this is going to happen. Act 49 makes it very clear, and I think that we should make it happen in the way that is most palatable to the folks here in the region. I personally think consolidation is a good thing, but even if I didn't, I'd hope that I'd realize that the writing's on the wall, and let's move forward and try to make this the best thing possible for all the folks in the region, all the children in the region. So I figure we keep working. Let's work hard on those documents, make sure that we address everyone's issues to the best of our ability, and give it to the voters, let them decide.
Thank you. Taylor?
I feel similarly to Dan. I feel like that it's coming, and whether we want to take advantage of the incentives or not is the question. So if we want to take advantage of the incentives, now's the time to do it. Otherwise, we lose that opportunity, and then we're merging, and everybody's absorbing everybody's debt regardless. I am a true believer that we should be an overall community, and all our kids are all our kids, and not, be clumped into different, territorial areas. I think that Mount Anthony, in terms of the SVSU and Mount Anthony, I think we do a good job regardless of the number. I mean, I know that there's concern with 4 Bennington representatives, but I think with MAU, there is a very successful ability to have those conversations and make sure that everybody's representation is heard and decisions are made with the best interest of the children of Mount Anthony. So I believe that we can do that at the elementary school level.
Thanks, John.
I'd rather have my fate in my own hands than have the fate in the hands of the state. And if you don't do it yourself, then you're gonna get screwed, one way or another.
You just like coming to these meetings, right?
Oh, I love it.
All right, I guess I'm of the opinion that I really like the MAU model. One of my fears of having the state come down and do this to us in a way is that we will, if they were not to accept the MAU board composition method, I think Bennington would, we have 63% of the students, we would actually have twice the votes that we have now. And I think there could be an argument about whether or not the state would do that, but it feels to me like we've come up with a model that balances this big town, little towns, tiny town thing, and it has worked for us in the past, and I'd love to see us keep working with it. So that's where I stand.
I'm kind of along the same lines as Don. Rather go ahead and vote and have some say in the structure, instead of having the state come down, because we could definitely lose out at that point and we'll still incur the debt. At least this way it gives us some say in the game. So that's kind of my idea. And if I look at strictly the tax rates, for us, we're not too far off from the merged rate and, our regular rate. So, I don't think it's a big difference for us from that point fiscally.
Amy?
I mean, I'm great with the sense of it's going to happen, and we need to, it'd be good for us to do it ourselves as opposed to have it come down on us later. And also, I think a lot about the representation on the board, and there's not a good sense, I don't think, that the state's going to say, okay, yeah, take your, Bennington has your 4 votes. I think it might be a proportional system. And that's a real, I mean, then you're really in a situation where Bennington's overrepresented. And I think that there's also, like, something we haven't really talked about a lot is there's opportunity. I mean, change is hard and difficult, but really wonderful things can come from it, especially when you talk about education. And I would hope that there's going to be some, I hope it's just an opportunity for new directions and for positive change, and maybe some good things can come of it. So.
Okay, thank you. Erin?
I'm probably in the same boat as everybody else is. I feel like we're kind of being cornered, and instead of just letting it happen by somebody else who really doesn't know who we are, I think we should be an active participant in that. I would also say, I would echo the opportunity part, like if this is a point in time where we can really kind of level our schools and our playing field so that we're, really bringing everybody up, that'd be great. I think that's a little Pollyanna, but
Take it,
why
take
not?
it.
I'll take what I can. I just think that, what we do here is important, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done afterwards, and we can't lose sight of that as well.
Okay, great, thanks. Dick, last word for you.
Woodford folks don't have any illusions about sharing liabilities. We have none of our own, but we already share liabilities for Mount Anthony. I don't think it's going to be a surprise to them that we pick up a percentage of Bennington. They're not going to be happy with an increased tax rate, but they're protective of their school system, and my gut says regulations could be defined that say wooden structures no longer meet state fire standards, and we could be shut down for some arbitrary reason like that. I think we're protected if we're part of a larger group, and I think it offers opportunities to increase our number of students and to flesh out some of the staff for the whole district where people are not on full-time equivalents. We only use .2s and things like that.
Yeah.
And there are people out there who could work into that situation very well. So I only say advisable because somebody's going to look at that tax rate and say, oh, man.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need to be there. And we're
Okay.
better off if we make make our own decisions. So.
Before I call the vote, Dan, is there anything that you heard that surprises you or that you would reflect on that you think we should be thinking about that we're not thinking about?
No, I mean, you're the first group I've worked with in this, well, I have another one, but this is a different moment in time, with Act 49. So it's this is a different, it's not surprising to me that you're servicing more of like we're under the gun. I hear, a year ago that maybe was out there, but people were talking a little bit more about it sort of being an open-ended, no one really knew what that meant. So now we kind of know a little bit more. So, I've been in the region, as you know, for a while, so it'd be my hope that whatever you do, that this district, become a flagship district in terms of your outcome for kids. I mean, it's a very dynamic region. You have a lot of cultural and resources, so I think I would hope that the governance change would help you figure that out and really, become a highly functioning, highly functioning district than you are now.
Okay, well, motion is on the table and seconded that we move forward with this as structured. And I guess I would say all in favor of the motion to indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so it is unanimous of the people who could vote tonight. Cindy, I recognize that we talked ahead of time about whether or not you could vote. But I would say it is unanimous that we move forward. So John's wish of more meetings comes true.
More the merrier.
More the merrier. Dan, this has not been entirely easy, but I thank you for bringing us a lot of
No problem.
data and a lot of sort of help in how we might look at this. But it feels a little bit to me like we're now just getting to the hard part. So in that we have to now push it out in a way that everybody can understand and that is useful
Yeah.
to the general public. So before we move, I am going to take some public comments at the end, but would you like to walk us through next steps and possibly the calendar?
Yeah, so really the next step for the committee's responsibility is to submit a proposal to the State Board of Education. And that proposal would consist of two documents, the document that's on the screen right now, the merger worksheet, and a merger study report. And the merger study report would also include the articles of agreement, formal term that would be voted on by the voters. So that's the next immediate target. With the timeline that's been established of November 30th for the incentives, and we back down from that, the Agency of Education staff, who would review anything before it went to the State Board, because they attach their opinion to the merger, are requesting that those documents get to them by the third week of August at the latest. So that means prior to that, you have to have a vote to approve the final versions of those documents. So that's really the timeline right now, and I think it's also prudent to include them in the drafting of those, and there's also going to be a need to consult your district attorney on the finalizing the articles of agreement, so to make sure they conform with the law.
Prior to the August submission?
Yeah, so before they come to you for a vote, we want to make sure they conform with a good approach to do that. So I've worked with your attorney before on these, so it's, we can do an expedited process. The report's not going to be an elaborate, War and Peace kind of approach to merging. It's going to be a pretty focused, get it
Which
done.
is important for the public and the vote.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
going to vote to keep
yeah.
it as concise as possible.
Yeah, so first step is to get through this next part of the process, and then assuming the state board would vote in favor of that, and that their meeting is going to be something like the third week in September, and then the committee's responsibilities shift a little bit to not to selling the merger, but to making sure the voters have everything they need to make a good decision. So that would include sometimes frequently asked question documents and public forums to explain the pros and cons of it and so forth. And then, to work with the town clerks to get the votes set up and so forth, to make sure basically the process runs smoothly and people know what they're voting on. So your job isn't to sell it, but to communicate, what you did and why, and explain the context to them. So in terms of, we had set some other dates for this committee already. And remind me of what you had for those. I have
The
The
next
20th.
Wednesday, the 26th.
Yeah, and then there was one
The
out.
10th.
10th. So
Yes, Wednesday the
Yeah.
26th here, and the 10th, was that also at the same time?
Unavailable
Yeah.
for next
Yeah.
week.
And I would say that for my purposes, assuming I'm going to be the one drafting the report, that I will not have much for you on the 26th. So the 10th.
Postpone the
Yeah,
26th.
yeah, that would not be, you guys might want to meet, but I'm not going to have anything for you, so you can meet on your own if you'd like. I will start working on this and, work with Jim and the attorney to make sure it's squared away, but it's likely I can have a draft, in your agenda packet for the meeting on the 10th.
How does the timing on that work? So if we
close.
meet on the 10th, do we
Yeah.
have to then do a rocket docket and vote on it that night?
Yeah, so you would probably, in some cases, I'm sure there might be embellishments or things you want to modify. Sometimes committees would give a tacit vote of approval, then authorize the chair or a couple people that want to work on editing it to finalize the key things, as long as those subsequent revisions aren't substantive changes. If they were just like wording, we'd like to see this emphasized or that, sometimes you can move expeditiously that way through it. But yeah, this committee should probably vote on the documents on the 10th. Or hold meetings shortly thereafter if you want to have, I would say no later than the 17th, somewhere in that time frame. So
What's the sense of the committee? Do we need another, so you wouldn't have any work for us until the 10th anyway?
Right,
And there's no other, and that's really the next stage of our,
yeah.
so, sounds to me like we're not going to meet again until the 10th. And,
10th and the 17th.
and
It should be the 10th and the
You wanna
17th.
add
You're gonna have
another-
a
17th is not scheduled, so we should reserve that.
so I will not be here the 17th, but
Well, the 16th, but pick a date,
I could do
before the 21st.
could anybody do Tuesday the 15th?
Yes.
I can do it.
I can't.
No.
You can't?
Cheerleader.
Dick, you can't?
I can.
How late in August can
I
we
mean,
go?
I could do it if we do it early enough, but not 6 to 8.
What if we go to Tuesday the 22nd? Are we cutting it too close, Dan?
Possibly. I think it depends on how involved Donna at the state is all along. She might, if she feels pretty comfortable with what we've produced as a draft, and she knows we've shared that with her, and there's not any substantive changes coming her way, she might feel comfortable, getting it a little later than that.
What about Monday, the 14th?
Yeah.
I could do Monday the 4th.
I have a select board meeting
Yeah,
that
select board
night.
meeting. That's at 6 PM, right?
Yeah, that's at 6 PM.
Have a breakfast meeting, Jim buys.
The 16th, you have Pownell and MAU.
And the first week of August is dead?
Don't we have one on the 10th?
We have one on the 10th.
We have one on the 10th,
That's
but
the
Dan can't
second
really
week.
get much to us before then.
Yeah.
Oh, before the 10th,
Yeah,
okay.
I
So
mean,
there's-
I've got some vacation in that first week too, so it's, I like the work, but I'm not going to be working any report on vacation.
On the beach. The purpose of a second meeting would be to do the heavy lifting on the 10th and then to...
Yeah, there's revisions that need to
Any
be done.
edits? Yeah.
All right, so why don't we, how would people feel, Dan, I know you can't make it, Dick, I know you can't make it, but how would people feel about holding the night of Tuesday the 15th as an alternative date that we might or might not need? With any luck, we wouldn't need it, but
Can we do it earlier so
Yeah.
that
we could do it
some
earlier.
people could make it? I mean, if it was at, my meeting's at 6:30, so if we met at 4, we have
Yeah, I could
Couple
probably
hours.
do it at 4.
Shirley could do it at 4.
Can we do 4:30?
4:30, that's fine.
4:15.
How are people feeling about 4:30 Tuesday, August 15th? Going? All right. Oh, a different time. I hope I can remember that. Text me somebody
I'll
if I'm
call you.
late.
Wait, so what time did we do, 4:15?
4:30.
4:30.
Act 46. Here?
If necessary, right?
If
Yeah.
Assume as long as it's available, I'm putting it in now.
Okay.
So, but do hold it firmly. Assume it's going to happen. We'll cancel it if we have to, but
When will we get the documents for review?
So we'll get into the agenda packet, so whenever that goes out in advance, so it should be in the packet.
At least a couple days before.
Yeah, it's going to be more lengthy than normal, and, it's, and there's a couple things I'll need some clarity on, and I'll work with Jim and Don on that, so we might have to, leave a few blanks in that, for instance, the date of the vote. It's useful to talk with your town clerks to get their input on that, and so that's something like I'd say to Jim, it would be good if you could, get the town clerks to weigh in on this stuff, and then we bring that up. It would be in a blank in your report, but we have it as an action item on your agenda to set the date of the vote based on, hey, we polled the clerks and here's what they would like to see, and,
Does it have to be a particular day for the vote?
Yeah.
I mean, like a Tuesday or?
Yep, they all have to be voted on at the exact same time, the exact same day, by Australian ballot. That's the law.
But I mean, is the day relevant? I mean,
You can pick any day, yeah.
Pick it, okay.
Yeah, it's really, the clerks, they really work with them, to make sure they can staff it in a convenient way. It's really important,
Yeah.
usually.
okay. So we've got a plan. We're going to wait for you. Thank you, everybody. That was really good. I guess if there are brief comments from the audience, we would certainly accept them at this point. Anybody have anything they would like to say? Jackie, go ahead. Yeah, come up to the mic and introduce yourself, please. Yep.
Jackie Burr. My question is for Mr. French. If BSD voters, because we're necessary, votes it down, and a couple of the outliers voted for it, what happens?
If the necessary votes it down, it fails.
And another question, because I was the chair of the committee for many times.
And fine chair you were.
Congratulations.
It was my understanding that a merged district had to have 1,200 students, and it had to be at least 2 districts merging. And BSD is not 2 districts.
Right. So what you're speaking to are parameters that are around the incentives. So Act 153, the reds, which was the same incentives that were sort of still established in Act 46, require either 4 districts or 1,150 students.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, BSD on its own, forget about that standard. Even if BSD voted on its own, it still wouldn't work because you don't have a majority of the town elementary school districts voting for it. So the key thing here, firstly, is that the districts that constituted Mount Anthony, a majority of them need to agree to the merger because you're altering the structure of Mount Anthony, essentially. You're making it a K-12 district. So that's the bigger issue. You have plenty of students, you have 3,000 equalized pupils, so it's not a question of that issue. It's really going to require think about it as any combination. Firstly, Bennington listed this as necessary, so if Bennington votes it down, it's not going to work. But any of the 3 vote together, you're going to have sufficient number of pupils to qualify for the incentives.
One more thing.
Go ahead. You're doing great.
Don't even want to talk about incentives because BSD alone has been bit by incentives before, dropping the budget, and then the real costs come to you in the end. So I wouldn't be using that as a selling point, and I'm just telling you that ahead of time because it will come back to bite you. And I do agree with Cindy on some things. I do believe that maybe we should stay the way we are. I mean, we've never done the work. And so get ready. I think you're going to have to.
Okay, thank you. Other comments from the audience? Ken?
I just have
Step up to the mic if you would, please. Thanks, sir.
I just have one question. I missed last week's meeting, and I remember before you came on board, Dan, that one of the things that the superintendent kept saying is all districts have to be the same, offer the same quality instructions and all of this. And someone had brought up, what about the 6th grades in the outlying areas? Bennington's up there and the other ones are in their own district. Is that okay? Or should they all be up in the middle school?
Yeah, so where students attend is the control of the school board, under Vermont law. So what you have to think about is now you're going to have one school board, and that school board's going to have the authority to control where students attend. So there, we talked last time a bit about language around protecting the closure of small schools, and this issue is usually related to that. But ultimately, it's important for the voters to realize that the school board under Vermont law has the control over, what students attend which schools and which grades. And that's honestly part of the intention of the law is to give a school board greater control over a broader group of schools as enrollments fluctuate to be able to make those decisions. Because as statewide, we've seen a pretty significant reduction in number of pupils, but there hasn't been a real reduction in staffing. And that's not because school boards aren't doing good work. It's because all of Vermont students are not in one school. And if they were, I'm sure we'd be making those reductions, but we're spread out in separate governance silos. So I think the idea is, anyway, the theory of action is if you have one board, they'll respond to those changes in an efficient manner and in what's educationally sound manner to the public.
Other questions from the audience? Okay. Oh, Mary, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I certainly appreciate the work you've done. I guess, though, I become a little bit concerned with the assumptions, especially in regards to the common level of appraisal. You didn't really comment a great deal about that, and that can have either a positive or a negative impact. So I'm not really feeling like we have the full picture here. And I would agree with Jackie in regards to the incentives, because that is the carrot before you right now. It could very quickly go away. So I wouldn't really base them for your future, predictions. But can you comment any more in regards to the common level of appraisal? Because
Yeah.
that's been an issue since
Sure.
Act 60 started 20-some years,
Yeah,
21 years
actually,
ago.
it predates Act 60. It's a fairly old mechanism. I think where it's become more important recently is that we, before the crash or whatever the recent recession is, we've seen pretty significant volatility in that, and it's going to continue to be volatile. So the idea of this modeling is that just to admit that that's not going to change, really, that, the volatility of the CLA is going to continue to be an issue. And that's really, it's still a local issue for each of these communities. But the conceptual idea is that there's going to be one tax rate, just like Mount Anthony has one tax rate, there'll be one tax rate, but that tax rate would be adjusted locally based on CLA. That whole phenomenon does not change with this merger. So we certainly, you could take, in this case, we're using modeling based on fiscal year 18 data, which is, it's fictitious. Once again, this model, the actual merger financials would be, in this case, fiscal year 20, and we don't know what the ed spending will be at that point. We don't know what the equalized pupils would be. We don't know what the legislature would establish as a property yield value. We certainly don't know what the common level of appraisals would be in these communities. But we could extend this model now if you wanted to see, what your actual tax rate would be by CLA. The reason why I didn't include it, because it's really not part of your political decision, because you're really saying, what's the effect of the merger? The CLA is still going to be variable. It's just going to exaggerate that effect. But to get around it, and that's why we take the incentives out as well. I mean, that first column where it looked at increase, decrease, pre-incentive is really the important number. We can throw the incentives in there to kind of show the effect, just like you could throw the CLA in. But the big issue is, what's the effect of it prior to incentives and prior to CLA? And I think that's, for the committee standpoint, what you need to know. But we certainly could bring the CLA into it.
Are you satisfied with that answer, Mary?
I think it would be important to have that information.
Yeah. And you can do, we'll consider some of the historical data. I thought of including some of that for your deliberations tonight, but once again, the purpose here is to get you to that place where you can make a decision. But it's interesting, particularly with the small school districts, to look at your historic tax rates, just like the historic CLAs, because we've done a comparison tonight based on, this year's numbers. Well, this number this year in a small district might be an anomaly. You might, as I said before, the merger tends to stabilize tax rates. We might just be looking at a year that you decide to tap into a reserve fund or had a big surplus and it artificially depressed your tax rate. So you're saying, 6 cents is tough. Well, if we looked at last year or we looked 10 years ago, we might find that the tax rate today is actually 20 cents lower than it was. Mm-hmm. I can think of some of my own communities where the tax rate, 8 years or 9 years ago was 40 cents higher than it is today. So when we were talking about the merger, this is a big increase. I'm saying, well, it's still 30 cents lower than what you were paying 9 years ago. So it's important not to sort of present a rationale for voters, but particularly with small districts where the tax rates can be fairly volatile to, changes in special ed or what have you. Your tax rates tend to swing around a bit, just to put it into a historic context. And I would say the CLA is part of that. Give the historical CLA information. That's something that would be typically included in the merger report, the bigger document we're going to work on. Give some historical context.
So something we're likely to see on the 10th, a little bit of information on that. Okay.
Yeah, it's something I usually throw in there because it provides some perspective.
Okay. Other questions from the audience? All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody very much. I'd accept a motion to adjourn if one was so forthcoming. We have a motion.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. All right. Good night.